Well, let's bring you some analysis on the ongoing peace efforts in South Sudan. Joining me in studio is security expert Dr. Mustafa Ali. Dr. Ali, of course, we've had the summit in Addis Ababa, but there were some key players not in attendance. Perhaps the most notable absentee was President Salva Kiir himself. Are these talks been taken seriously enough, or is there a sense that fatigue has set in?
It appears that the talks are only taken seriously by the leaders in the region other than the leaders in South Sudan. The fact that Salva Kiir was not there, and really this summit is focusing a lot on South Sudan, means that the leaders in South Sudan are not interested in a solution that is going to be discussed, other than the solution that Salva Kiir himself thinks should be imposed on the Southern Sudanese. And therefore, it's not really about the fatigue in the regional leaders, it's just the sheer lack of seriousness on the part of the Southern Sudanese leaders.
And indeed, another absentee from this meeting, of course, is former Vice President Riek Machar. Has he been essentially excluded from any further talks or any future attempts at bringing peace to South Sudan, or is there still room to include him or bring him back into the equation?
Yeah, I think there's still room to include him in the ongoing talks if there's going to be sustainable peace in South Sudan. What is happening in South Sudan is that none seems to be really caring much about the civilians and the people that they are ruling in South Sudan. And this applies to both Salva Kiir and Riek Machar.
Indeed. And of course, the ultimate aim when it comes to the humanitarian aspect, the citizens, is that we want to see a tangible solution to the South Sudanese crisis. But as you say, perhaps it's only going to come from the perspective that Salva Kiir wants to impose a particular solution. What is the biggest stumbling block, for us to finally see some tangible, rather tangible progress?
Yeah, there are two very big stumbling blocks in South Sudan. Number one is Salva Kiir himself, and number two is Riek Machar. These two leaders are the biggest stumbling blocks to what needs to be done to bring back peace in South Sudan. If you look at the communique that has come from the IGAD summit, it's really harsh on both the government and those armed groups, essentially from the opposition groups, that are terrorizing civilians in South Sudan, that are even preventing humanitarian assistance from reaching the civilians. And therefore, these two so-called leaders should just, in the opinion of many in the region, exit the scene.
Indeed, we'll have to wait and see if that is likely to happen at all. Thank you so much, Dr. Ali, for that analysis, joining us here in studio. Now, indeed, the United Nations is assessing the next step in responding to the continuing security and humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. The UN Security Council recently renewed sanctions against the country, while the World Food Programme is increasing efforts to address the famine there. CGTN's Nick Harper reports from New York.
The United Nations is undoubtedly still focused on South Sudan. For the UN Security Council, finding peace in the country is still one of its top priorities. However, recent weeks have seen more pressing issues come to the fore, like Syria and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Almost 3 weeks ago, the Security Council recommitted to the sanctions programme against South Sudan, renewing it for another 12 months. Now that means continued asset freezes and travel bans on South Sudanese individuals that are thought to be hampering the peace efforts in the country. An arms embargo remains on the table, but it is a divisive proposal. Some countries, including China and the African nations on the Council, prefer mediation, saying an arms embargo is unlikely to reduce violence in the country. Meanwhile, the famine in South Sudan remains one of the major challenges facing the World Organization. On Monday, the UN's World Food Programme issued an urgent appeal for an extra $1 billion to help 20 million people at risk of starvation in 4 countries, including South Sudan. It says that money will only cover the next 6 months and is needed now to prevent more deaths from occurring. The WFP also urged government and regional militia not to block aid, something which has been an issue in South Sudan. The organisation says using food as a weapon of war is unacceptable. The UN Security Council meets next Wednesday to discuss South Sudan, when Council members will be briefed on the latest developments and the humanitarian situation inside the country. It will also hear the first monthly assessment report of the newly deployed Regional Protection Force, what will eventually be a 4,000-strong deployment to help the peacekeeping force there. Additionally, the UN Security Council will hear about what progress has been made by the parties towards ceasing hostilities. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.